This is a session being example. Let's see. First of all, we need to define an interface called interest. This interface just extends the EJB object, right? And we can see that this is a part we the EJB object defines a calculate interest, so we still need to define this function here. This is interface home, just extends home, right? Just extends home. This is a bean class, right? Just implements the session bean. Now we just write bean is largest here. System out means print out something, then return something, So this is the actual business process. But besides this bean class, we also need to define what the interface, the home, right? Also, so this is also interface interest home. This is called interest. This interest is actually represents the EJB from the perspective of the EJB container. Okay. This is the actual bean class. Now let's see. This is This is a configuration file of this session bean. Now we can see this is description. This description is just looked by the human beings. Display name inside of the GNDI. Now this is EJB's name. You know that when a session bean is created, we need first to register this bean into the GNDI. Actually, the GNDI is an index service, right? An index service. So we need to prepare this configuration file to help us to register this session bean into the GNDI. Okay, so the GNDI requires the EJB's name, the home interface, the remote home interface, the EJB class, the bean actual class. The session type is this is a stateless. Transaction type means a bean. Okay, after we prepare this configuration file, we can just we can just register this session bean into the GNDI. Now this is a client, EJB's client. We can see that first of all, we need to define the initial context of what GNDI context here. Now, via the GNDI, you know GNDI is a service, right? It's an index service. Now we can use a lookup to find out, to find the instance of the session bean. The instance of the session bean. Now, interest means the name of the session bean. After that, we the refer just to represent what the reference to the instance of this session bean. Now we use the home. The remote home. Now after we abandon the object of this remote home, now we can what? Okay. Now here we can say interest calculated compound interest here. We can see that this is RMI, remote method invocation. Okay. We use an RMI to invoke the session bean remotely. Okay, please remember interest calculate compound interest. This is the actual remote interface of this session bean here. Calculate compound interest here, right? 1, 2, 3, 3 input parameters. 1, 2, 3, right? Okay, so please remember that. So EJB is just a software component or a server component. We needed to write some business logic inside of the EJB, but this is only part of the session bean. Okay. Yeah, if you wanted to develop the entire session EJB, you need to, besides the actual bean class, you also need to prepare the interface, the home interface, the remote interface, right? And this just helps the developer to register the EJB into the JNDI so that the client can use the JNDI to discover what the object of the instance of the EJB. Can you understand? Yes or no? Yeah. Okay. So read this sentence. Why I just show you the client code about the session bean, just because of by the client codes you can see how to use the session bean via the JNDI for lookup, for the home, then creates the instance as the object of the object represents the session bean, then we can use it. So please remember, from the perspective of the server, after we implement the actual bean, the EJB class, we also needed to implement the home here, the home, right? And also we need to prepare the configuration file, right? The configuration file so that the developer can register the session bean into the JNDI. So the client can use the JNDI context to look up the required JNDI instance, right? Then via the home, we can just create the object to represent the session bean. Then we can use the interester to invoke the session bean. Okay, so read this slide for 5 minutes to understand how does the client to use the session bean, and from the perspective what from the perspective of the developer, how to design a session bean. Okay, so for 6 minutes for you to read this slide to understand from the client, from the developer, how to design and use the session bean. Okay.